Welcome. Welcome back to the Siris King Show. This is your host, Siris King. I'm going to talk about in this episode, it's going to be about African traditional religions. A lot of you guys ask me, what's the ATR? African traditional religion, right? And it's one of my favorite topics, though I do admit I haven't, like in my YouTube or as long as I've been making content, I've been making content since like 2009 or 10. Like, could you imagine, like 15 years? I haven't really, I've spoken about it, but I want to say it's the majority of what I've spoken about, even though it's my favorite topic. Maybe shamanism is maybe number one, African traditional religion number two, but they kind of link together anyway, right? It's kind of more nature spirituality. And it's interesting in a sense because when we go to African traditional religions, I find that most people are talking about West African spirituality or Bantu spirituality, and then their counterparts in the New World, right? So when you say counterparts in the New World, whether that's Voodoo, whether it's Candabole, whether it's Kibanda, whether it's Alpha Ifa, Orega de la Ocha, whatever, spiritual, or Shango Baptist more. It's always something like that, right? Or a folk version of it, Santeria, kind of folk Catholicism, right? Catholicism mixed with Ifa worship. So most of the time when people talk about African traditional religions, they're talking about West African or Bantu. So even if you say Sangoma is still more Bantu, even though South Africa, right? So, because South Africa has Bantu populations. So when you do that, and then you might have Kemetic dudes, people who study Egyptian science who will be like, Egypt is part of that, but Egypt is, it is, but it's that's complicated. You can't really do an African system, and this is what I'm going to talk about, truly without understanding certain things. And I find when it comes to Egypt, whether it's black people, whether it's white people, whether it's even the North Africans themselves, they kind of get a lot of Egypt shit wrong, especially when it comes to spirituality, all three of them. So when I'm talking about this stuff, I ain't really talking about Egypt. Like, you guys handle your own business. It's not my job to fix your shit. Like I told people before, I'm sub-Sahara, all that other shit. North Africans are my brothers, but they're my brothers with their own house. So you guys can't fix your shit. It has nothing to do with me. So that's neither here nor there, right? But it actually fits what I'm saying, what I'm going to say. You can't. So when I say you can't do the African systems without understanding certain key things, I hear a lot of stuff, right? So I hear a lot of people. So for instance, let's just run through this real quick. Because a lot of stuff's confusing to people. Africa, when I'm talking about Africa, I'm talking about Africa, the continent. I'm talking about the Atlantic side of South America and Central America and the whole Caribbean, right? And then adjacent Africa. Adjacent. You know what? I'll say Central America up until, let's see, Panama, Nicaragua. Let me see. Panama, Africa. Okay, so Nicaragua, Honduras, half Africa, right? They could occupy both oceans. And then, so half Africa. And then when you talk about Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, the southeastern part of America. So the southeastern part of America, Africa adjacent. Southeastern part of America, Alabama, Mississippi, Virginia, whatever, from stuff with slave trade, right? So we talk about that. And then talk about the forgotten Africans, right? People who left Africa in the beginning. The Melanesians, the Aborigines, right? And the Micronesians, a half. And then some of the indigenous peoples of India, right? And then the counterparts in the Philippines, and I think Thailand and Malaysia and Pakistan. Well, then we get the cities populations of Pakistan, India, and I'm missing somebody else, right? So for me, and then of course, as one of the founding tribes, like when Arabia that identity was constructed, it was red and black. So a good 20, it depends how you want to look at it, 20 to 40% of that shit is African, right? So, whether you're in Kuwait, North Africa for sure, but whether you're in Kuwait, see, I said North Africa for sure because I'm not like these other dudes. I'm not going to say North Africans ain't from that. They just have it, they have to get certain things in politics together, right? And their shit's more together than their counterparts, the African adjacent dudes in Kuwait. Oman and Yemen, cool. Oman and Yemen, all right, they got it. But like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, they gotta get their shit together, right? And obviously we got the homies in Madagascar, the Malagasy people. Like, see, I don't play with that shit. I'm not like you dudes who you get initiated in one system or you go to 4 African countries and then you start speaking for all Africa. Nobody can speak for all Africa. It's the first continent. It's beyond the continent, right? For whether it's the most animal life, may not be the most plant life, but the most important plant life, the most diverse microbes, which get into bacteria, fungi. You guys haven't even thought about what I'm talking about. Nobody can speak for Africa. It's why? Because this is good. This is what's good. This is what's going to happen. First of all, it's the most diverse continent and fellow, populations of other continents. So it's decentralized. So when I say no one can speak for it, think of it like east, west, north, south. And the Congo or the center is kind of more associated with the west, right? And then the south is kind of half the west. So the West Africa is, and then in the Americas, they're coming more from the West Africa, right? So like the West Africans have heavy weight when it comes to Africa. So in people's minds, when you think Africa, they're thinking a lot of West Africa. Because even when you think Bantu, the Bantu kind of mysterious, but even they have, they may have started in Cameroon, and even they have, extensive ties to West Africa too. Right? They just may be more mixed with the Bakada, or what some people call the Pygmies, right? So when people think Africa, they think, wherever they stone out, they think out of West, right? So the thing that happens is this. A lot of these things are complicated, very complicated, right? Because, and when I say very complicated, I'm coming from the angle that we have to really be careful how we see certain things, because we ain't Asian, we ain't Europe especially. Those people, and sometimes to their benefit, they're more centralized. They have less complexity between them. We the ones who invented tribes, right? They're the ones who invented race as we know it, right? They invented that. So meaning black, white, whatever, Asian, whatever. And in some of the older forms of Ether, they would say stuff like Ishu created a lot of the different races as you see it, right? For them, the black race might be, I don't want to say more important, but it might be unique in the sense that, Abatala created, with Ishu's help, and Yamael gave birth. It's just their stories. The of Odisha, which eventually gets into Oyo in Africa, right? West Africa, Nigeria, right? So Ishu created all the different races, right? So this is how we're looking at it from the African wisdom point of view. All races come from Africa. So, when you're looking at what the ancients said, their stories are kind of fitting in that. Now, the reason why it gets complicated, because when we say when the Europeans came in, for them, they have a certain way of looking at race, they have a certain way of looking at culture, they have a certain way of looking at spirituality. Not just Europeans, the Asians do too. The Asians might be a little bit closer naturally to how we do it, because a lot of Austronesian people went to Asia and Oceania, became Indians, the Southern Indians, and they kind of inspire a lot of other people, in the Asian continent. So, and then West Asia's Middle East, and they have a lot of East African influence in terms of even culturally, spiritually. So Asia would have been a little bit closer, but still different, right? So how we look at stuff is different. So when they look at race and culture, white people and Asians to some extent, it's fixed. It's fixed, right? Now, I'm not talking about the present African and the descendants now. The present African and the descendants now have been mind-fucked, excuse my French, by their oppressors. So they don't know any better, right? So it'll be like saying, if I understand, so for instance, if I understand, I hear, let's go to Ifa a little bit, right? I hear a lot of shit, right? And I told you motherfuckers before, I ain't going back and forth for nobody, no ATR, back and forth with none of them niggas. I'm telling you that right now. Just saying. Right? Just like when I used to live in New York, from the Bronx. It's more challenging. There's always gonna be beef, right? But it's more challenging when it's a nigga from another borough than a nigga from the Bronx. My stopping ground. I'm just saying, back in the, not me now, I've been in New York for years. like that in that capacity. But for the most part, any serious beefs I had are in other boroughs, right? It's like sometimes when you did it, you ain't got to prove shit. So an ATR, like a person coming in and in practice the ATR, I don't even know what to tell them, right? Sometimes you got to know your place. So I don't know what to tell them, right? If you a nigga who just came in and you not even from a certain country and you got initiated, you spend 20 to 25 grand. You can't spend 25 grand don't buy you fully into that shit. It buy you visitor status. And then when you visit or guest, but meaning you got a visa, and then you work your way up. Then you could talk, right? And you know how you know that? Because there's plenty of people who just come in, get initiated, get a Facebook joint or whatever, and just start saying shit. And then the thing is, even if by somehow they got it correct, Africa ain't Europe, it ain't Asia, right? We West, North, South, Central, and then all the counterparts, whether it's in Asia, Middle East, India, blah blah blah, Philippines, the Americas, it's just different. And Ethiopia ain't gonna be able to tell you what's going on in Guinea. Just saying, he ain't gonna tell you what's going on in Guinea-Bissau. He ain't gonna tell you what's going on Ivory Coast. He definitely ain't gonna tell you what's going on in Haiti. So, but then we use terms like all black people, all Africa. That's why even when I use an ATR, it's like, yeah, but we're not Europe and Asia. We're way more diverse spiritually. Think about it. You go to Brazil by itself, Candomblé, eat for worship, right? Ubanda, Kbanda, right? Like Angolan spirituality, sometimes it depends on, sometimes it could exist by itself. Sometimes could it go into mixed with Ifa worship. And even then, sometimes it could be mixed with Ifa worship, European spiritism, the Brazilian Native Americans. That's just in Brazil, right? And the Brazilians have their own voodoo. It get complicated. That's just Brazil, right? That's just Brazil. We ain't talking about all, because a lot of times the mistake a lot of people make is, yeah, Brazil, Cuba, Haiti, they have the most structure. But like when you start going like what's left in Panama or sometimes Colombia, Venezuela especially, and even small English islands, Dominica, not Dominican Republic, but Dominican Republic too, but Dominica, St. Lucia. Like sometimes you don't even know what's going on over there because in those places, certain things are more illegal, so it get really underground, right? So you ain't gonna be able to Google and know what them niggas are doing. So it gets really complicated, right? But the thing you need to hear from this is, when you look at, and this is my whole point, I would hear people say, like I remember I was on this Voodoo Chick's channel, and she was like, I forgot what it was. It could have been a comment she was responding to, but she was talking about initiation, and she was saying something like, the only people got to get initiated are Hispanics. Something like that. And she was from America. And again, we're not saying, like, everyone got their own strengths. When it comes to this political shit, when it comes to understanding if you're into that white supremacy, ain't nobody's beating an FBA motherfucker. Fundamental black Americans understand that shit. Period. They were in the fire. They understand that shit. They don't fall for bullshit when it comes to that. I give them that. When it comes to spiritual shit, from an African's perspective, you can be from over America and understand spiritual shit from another perspective. From an African perspective, you gotta catch up. So she comes in and was like, yeah, it's Hispanics. And I'll say, I don't even know what that even means. I know what you want it to mean. I know what you want it to mean, right? I know what you want it to mean. But, and this is what I mean by when you're a visitor and you haven't earned certain stuff yet, right? You can believe anything you want. First off, this is why unifying black people is hard, because we everywhere. We in places, we transform. Sometimes we don't even look what you call black anymore, right? Then you get people who say, well, if you don't look black, you ain't black. Like, yeah, and then you got some people who say, if you ain't from a certain culture, you ain't black. You see? So to unify that, I don't know if it's realistic. I think you can unify in certain areas, especially economics, yes. But even spiritually, it's hard. Because I know what she wants to say, but she's not correct. The Brazilian and Cuban culture especially, are their own thing that was inspired by what happened in the slave trade coming from Africa. was inspired by it. And some things died. You look at what you call it, capoeira, you barely see that in Africa no more. That's Brazil now. Like there's certain things got transferred across the seas permanently. Why? Because half the time we were coming to America before the slave trade. Right? So some things were transferred even before the slave trade. And something transferred, something to merge with other things. Then we had, a lot of the homies, the Polynesians and them coming from, them dudes are better sailors. A lot of them coming to the western part of South America, and we merged with them too, creating some new shit. So that's why I said, I know what you want to say. You're wrong even with that, but it's like, and then how would you be able to speak for, shit. Like I said, Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, to a lesser extent, Trinidad and Puerto Rico, initiation is really, they have more structure, so it's popular. You go to some of the other countries, there ain't no initiation like that. Jamaica, you could put whatever five, but a lot of that shit's obeah. Ain't no initiation obeah. So I don't know what you're talking about. Especially when you really look at it like, Brazilians and Cubans, them dudes held up for shit. When a lot of people know about IFA, them dudes inspired sometimes. Look, in Nigeria, if you live in a rural area, it's different. IFA's still strong in the rural areas, right? In the city, them dudes over here inspire some dudes to keep up their own tradition. Back over there. We brothers and sisters in that sense. This not no kumbaya shit. Brothers and sisters in the sense that, you have a brother, he got his own house. So you're affiliated, but you really can't tell him what to do in his house. And you can think, well, he should do this, he should do that. Listen, the last time I looked, whether it's overthrowing the European completely, Haiti, or merging and mixing Brazil, not Cuba is not mixing much of Brazil, right? Both places, the black populations are still at the bottom. Or if you say Haiti, it didn't free them the way they were supposed to, right? So obviously certain things need to be shifted. And part of that is, in the end, as we're going to close with this, understanding what an ATR really is and what that African identity, especially when you merge it with spirituality, really is. When you have that African identity merging with spirituality, it transcends what you look like now. It transcends that, right? Because when you go back, this is beyond Sangoma. When you go back to the San people of South Africa, the Bushmen, some of the first Africans. Because I always say when you're going to check a nigga, you go back to the beginning. I don't have time for West African niggas. You niggas is late, right? When you go back to the beginning, they would say they had two agreements. Two. You had an agreement with Mother Nature, which everybody can have, right? Mother Nature is everyone's mother. Everyone is made up of fire, water, and wind, and earth. Everybody, right? So that's one agreement, and that means that's how the shaman. So the Bushmen. That's why, and even the Baka people, right? To some extent, they would say that's why the shamans have power, because they're using that agreement. That's a universal agreement that's older than any religion, right? Fire, water, wind, and earth, and then you kind of know about the plants and animals, and the plants, especially the animals, die. And then it kind of goes into the dead. That's his own agreement. That's older than any Abrahamic religion. That's older than even Kemet. It's old. You have that one. Then you have an agreement, the way some people describe it, right? Because so far I've been looking at, I've been paying attention to social media, YouTube. I'm sure there's some, but there's not many people who chopped it up with those types in South Africa or the pygmies or the Baka, right, in Congo. Not many. You guys are going to the systems that came after that. So systems came after that, there's going to be some things they don't know. Right? So then you come in and you're like, all right, you got one agreement. One, with nature, right? You agreement meaning you're her child and you're supposed to care for her and she cares for you, vice versa. That could be a form of magic by itself. Then you have the second agreement. And depending who you hear talk, they'll say either there are people possessed with a higher energy and higher intellect, possessed where the intellect was extraordinary. Materialists will say extraterrestrials, but extraordinary from the mind. They came with some other shit, right? And they came with some other shit, and they were more kind of affiliated with East Africa. Even though the East Africans came later, they were more affiliated with that, right? So whether you want to say they were already East Africans blessed with extraordinary intellect, which is not shocking when you realize East Africa, like Ethiopia especially, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, all Ethiopia. Judaism, some of the oldest form of Judaism exists in Ethiopia. Some of the oldest form of Christianity, other than, I think, the Caucasus Mountains, other than them, Ethiopia. When Muhammad was in trouble, he had to come to Ethiopia to help. Right? So then that extraordinary intellect became the foundation of what the Abrahamic religions are built on. That's what that is. Right? But it's a whole other story. Only people older can know that. So most people would never be able to fathom that, the younger races. So because that intellect, or whatever it was tapping into, was the foundation what Abrahamic religions were formed on, there is a tie between Abrahamic religions and Africa. But it's more complicated. Right? Now, if you're a person who just following the perception of your colonizer, you don't even understand that this stuff is passed on in two ways, through blood and through breath. This is why in the East, when you see a real authentic yogi, they come from a certain tradition and they can manipulate their breath and transfer energy between you and them. That's when yoga works. That's why Eastern stuff doesn't work in America, because the people who are teaching here don't transfer energy. They don't come from a lineage, but they don't transfer energy from their lineage to the student in question, because they forgot. But as Africans, for real, there's things we remember that others don't. That's just the truth. So if you say, if I have brothers and one brother says, "Hey man, I ain't initiating no one non-African," that's how he runs his house. That's not a universal rule. That's a rule he made, and we have to respect that. A lot of people talk like it's a universal rules, and there's not much. There's some universal rules in ATRs: love of the ancestors, respect of the ancestors, respect of nature. No ATR is gonna not say those two things. Anything else depends. Depends. That's why even in Beta Israel and Ethiopians, the black Jews, they used to do sacrifice to animals still they used to do blood sacrifice up until like maybe 100 years ago, even though they're Jews. Right? There's just certain things that's universal when it comes to ATRs. Right? And so that has to be remembered when a lot of you guys ask these questions about what's an African traditional religion and should you follow it. And I always say you should if you're really about it. But the problem comes in, it's hard to get people to do that because they don't understand that it's so massive that it can turn into whatever you want it to. So if you want it to just be ancestor, it can. That's when it's function at its minimum level. Right? So when you want to make this shit, what my grandmother was doing, what my great-grandmother was doing, or my grandfather was doing, you could. But that's it functioning on its lowest level. And hence, when you're saying we need to organize this shit so we can uplift our people, you ain't gonna never do that just being ancestral. That's it on its base level. Why? Because it's beyond, it's like religion, culture, and race at the same time. And most people can't understand. It's sort of how the Jews are in a way. We older than them, but it's sort of like that. Like, you could be Jewish as religion, but you're still Jewish. But then you could be a convert. If you're a convert, you're still Jewish. Right? But then it's also a blood thing. So if you don't believe in Judaism, you're still a Jew. Who do you think they got that from? Just saying. Who do you think they got that from? We had that first. That's why it still works. That's why IFA still works in Cuba, in Brazil. It could go with somebody who don't even have black blood at all. They could still do it. There may be certain differences, but they could still do it. Right? So some of it is ancestral. There is a component, especially because of how they practice. They don't do the breath. So because they don't do the breath, it's easier to spin it that it's just blood related with them. That's why then it comes to just ancestors. But it's beyond that. It's like when you got a white homie, like sometimes you see that in Oakland and places like that where they grew up around black people, right? And so if in that area, Like, people accept them. They say the N-word, everything. No one cares. But then that same person goes outside California, or especially Northern California. People are like, hey. You hear the South, niggas like, hey, what you use the N-word for? Yes, because it's culture, religion, and spirituality in one. So we can pass it on to somebody else will say, well, you're giving it to that person. But at the same time, it's decentralized, meaning, hey man, that person's down with your house. You let that motherfucker know, right? If he another race, if he go outside to the universal black community, it's up to them to accept him or not. That's why it doesn't matter. See, when we become Christian or Muslim, it doesn't. I don't care. You can do whatever you want, right? But the difference will be those energies don't die, even if you're Christian or Muslim. It's always on, because you just like if a Jew decides to be Christian, he's still a Jew. Just saying, no matter what, right? It's like a permanent seal. We older than them, we have it more than they do. So much so that even when sometimes the person doesn't look visibly black, they still a brother, they still a sister. And if you want to practice a spirituality, and again, I'm not telling you, you hear this video, you Ohogana Mambo, or blah, blah, blah. I don't care what you do. Because if you know what I just said, you have the right to run your house the way you run it. But just know that's your house. Even if for somehow you unified all West Africa, that's just West Africa. And the counterparts in the border. Ain't the North, ain't the East, ain't the South especially. Probably ain't even the center. And it ain't going to be the stuff from the Indian Ocean and on the Pacific. So when you understand what that means, you understand that when you do these things, even some of you guys who came in and said, I'm not doing ATR, that's pagan worship. Nigga, if you black, it don't matter what you think. That's what you are. You just a person who's just doing Christianity and Islam, or choosing to do Kemet, or choosing to say Israelite. That's fine, because it doesn't really need you to exist. It would always exist as long. Some of it doesn't even need people to exist. As long as certain plants exist, and sometimes as long as certain animals exist, it would exist. Can't really die. You could make the argument as long as Earth exists, it will exist. It don't really need you. Don't kid yourself. Whether you give it offering or not, the offering just does it where you could use those energies to intercede in your life. Those energies don't need your offerings in general. They need your offerings to intercede in your life. That's a big difference. So when you understand that, the way you look at African traditional religions, and the way you look at spirituality, and the way you look at your own identity will change forever. Siris King. Till next time. Peace.